something that I may be beneficial to everyone in the room. So I guess all of y'all like veterans, and I guess we can talk about cybersecurity. I think one of the coolest things to note, or strangest things to note nowadays, is the fact that like a lot of companies and businesses still have a lack of understanding when it comes to building a business continuity plan or safeguard protocols that kind of essentially secure them or help them ensure sound operation or even the mitigation of damage when a security event has occurred, right? So like one strategy that like I love to implement for my customers that I guess I can give you as a swag hack for today is to actually focus on building a safeguard protocol, right? So for me, like one of the simplest things that I always focus on doing is ensuring that they have a backup set in place. Something that ensures that every so often their web assets, their digital assets, and anything that comprises their content can be backed up on maybe a weekly to weekly basis, on a offset day to day basis, or even on a monthly basis, right? So a lot of websites today, if you're using a content management software, for example, like WordPress, actually has inbuilt features within them to where you can actually set this up on an automated way, right? If you go into your cPanel, has an administrator, and then access the settings for your WordPress installation instance, you can actually go about setting up a specific backup server location, whether it be on the server file itself or even on an external account like Google Drive. This is something that I highly recommend you guys look into doing right now because you never know what could happen. It's always good to be prepared. Started this off is so we have someone who's entering into following up, a pianist, and rare earth metals. And what that kind of talks to me, funny enough, is globalization. So it's really funny. Last night I was having a conversation with someone who was working for Tesla, and we got into a conversation about innovation and even just trade and economics as a whole. And something that I kind of touched on that I have kind of always wanted to mention is, so first and foremost, I'm not affiliated to any political party. I don't lean either Democrat or Republican. I'm independent because I believe like all sides have something to offer. But one of the things that I believe is going to be shown in the coming years is the sheer strategic aspect of what President Trump has been doing in the background in terms of amortizing our costs for some of the different things that America is currently needing, right? So one of them is actually the necessary, if you want to call it, amortization when it comes to metals and minerals and natural resources, right? So as a whole, as a nation, we've actually nationwide on the nationwide board been lacking in terms of resources that have to do with manufacturing and production, things like steel, iron, copper. Those ores, since the Industrial Revolution, have actually been in severe shortage because of the sheer expansionary aspect of our production, right? So one of the things he's been doing is actually creating key strategic partnerships with countries like Russia, China, and some of the Middle Easterns because they have a abundance of these minerals, and that fact allows them to do production and manufacturing at a scale that we do not know of. So that if you heard of like the NAFTA agreements and like transcontinental deals, that's really what it was all about. Making it to where when the time comes for American power to come back and do manufacturing and production at scale, we'll have the supplies in place because the cost of transportation and exporting them and bringing them into the country will be next to nothing. Hope I didn't inconvenience anyone with the time over, and I hope you got something out of this. It's kind of funny that we have a bunch of digital people here because strategy, I think, is like one of the greatest things. So I guess one thing that I would leave or
Can you come close to the mic, Stephen?
yeah, can you hear me now?
Just about.
Okay, so one thing that I would like
Yeah.
really impart people with is the idea of vibe and knowledge, right? So if I was running a window cleaning business today, like the first and like most like crucial execution when it comes to content creation would be to actually every time I arrive at a client's house, I would actually do like an overview video zoom of like the place has before I showed up, and then I take a video again afterwards. And then like what I would do is I would cut like a 3 to 5 minute sizzle reel of like the things that I can do for a company in terms of appeal for visual senses, right? Like, this is an idea of what I can do for you. This is you before me. This is you after me, right? Like, I think content like that would fucking kill for window cleaners, right? So that's one vibe, right? The second thing that I would do is education. I think all too often the most, I guess, under optimized or underutilized strategy is actually just providing value for the sake of, right? So the way I put it is like, imagine in your mindset there's a spirit that sees everyone as a family member and not as a customer. Like, the person that you love the most in the world is the person that you typically would treat just as you would want to be treated, right? So if you saw your mom or your dad in need of something that you know you're a fucking expert at and a boss at executing on, then you would just disseminate information and content at hand to where like it's just for the love. And that's how I would go about treating my education content. So things like, hey, this is like, do you have a pet? This is one of the dopest products on the planet right now that goes about knocking out some of the odors and like even pet stains on your carpet, things like that. Do you often throw parties? This is some of the things that could actually knock out that that pesky wine stain or that Everclear spill from that party. Things like that where you're just literally providing value for the sake of, and through that demonstrating not just clear expertise in what you do, but a sheer care for the person that you're trying to treat. So that's kind of how I would go about it. Really passionate for is, funny enough, Biden's push for a green economy. I think it's something that's been coming for a really, really, really long time, and it's nice actually seeing it actualized. You know, like, I think for something that has such a grand scale in terms of scope, even in development, and even just like the pulling together of all the capital and pieces that need to make it a reality. It's so refreshing to see everyone on a nation board scale being like uniformly in agreement that it would be the coolest thing to have. So I think that's one thing I'm really passionate for. On how a nation is essentially comprised of its individuals, and the bare or sheer essence of business, if you want, is simply the exchange of goods that essentially compensate something that you currently do not have. So I have a lot of chicken and you have a lot of cows, and I need milk and you need eggs. So this is how we provide one another value, right? So he takes that as the basis of any form of finance or economics and what trade does for humans and a society at large. And then he scaffolds that to the next level and essentially talks about how by taking things from this approach, one can actually see a nation has the sum sheer product of its output versus its input, right? So that's how you get into like global capita and the essential nature of fiat, or what currency valuation is. And what I've always found interesting is that he always takes approach from like analyzing skill in terms of trade, quality, and the refinement of natural resources. Yes, I take another vein to it. To kind of add on to what I was saying. One of the coolest thing that's actually occurring right now is the fact that we're actually revisiting the tax code, the IRS code, and how it's currently formulated. And they're essentially getting rid or stripping a lot of what was traditionally held as like long-standing codexes that comes to taxing, right? So with his push for green, we're essentially reassessing what it means to have an infrastructure. And one of the things to essentially make this a viable reality for not just us, but the long-standing or long-coming generations to come is a push for reinvestment in strategic technology, right? So how I break it down is if you're familiar with the concept of retained earnings, right? Like when you get money, what happens is after payroll has been disseminated, there are times when there's a portion left over that is not yet doled out. And so some strategies are to just kind of like either find a viable asset to reinvest it into the company, right? Buying amenities, paying for upgrades, and doing investments that essentially raise the value of your business, right? So to get into it, this is essentially what he's doing longhand. So if you hear about like raises in taxes, it's just his way of proposing. Think of the nation having a pot where we collect or pull together all of the retained earnings of major corporations, business dealings, transactions, and instead of just finding a way to make little to no tax payment on that pool of money, we actually invested into building a new green infrastructure, right? So for financial services, this is, for example, the move towards integrating a digital DNA into your company. Me, for example, I just ordered a new POS system because I plan on essentially doing more commerce that pertain to adult products. For example, I think self-care is one of the greatest undervalued parts of our lives, and it's something that I'd like to move towards changing, right? So if you can actually infuse something to where you're amortizing the expenses that you're making on transactions, whether it's the management of, the moving of capital, or even just the sheer accrual of, you're placing yourself in a better position day for day than your past predecessors. And that's something that he's actually incentivizing companies to do. Because if you think about the sheer amount of management that go towards moving large sums of cash, then you realize that digital, moving pixels or binary or bytes and bits across the screen, is offering such a like game-changing pound for pound cost beneficial alternative and a great solution to a lot of, if you want to call it, leaking bucket solutions that come to the expense tablet of the accounting equation. So that's something that I really would, I guess, advise y'all or suggest or impart on y'all today. How are you
Thanks for
going
sharing that.
digital?
Awesome.
You're welcome. It's funny you talk about health and beauty because, as I mentioned, I think the other day, one of the things that I've been doing, and I know that Larry is like actually an expert in this, is messing with the actual water settings for a water filtration system of the house. So if you don't know, like the body is primarily naturally deficient in manganese and iron. Like as humans, this is the reason why we consume so much animal product or products that are not just plant-tied, because those minerals are just key to a lot of the critical functions of the body. Things like building rigid bones, rigid teeth, some of the things that make up your hair, and even some of the key cellular activities in the body. We need a lot of manganese when it comes to just the titration of the sodium to zinc processes. So something to kind of like rinse all of those things out. So like I've been messing with our water systems in terms of like introducing more iron and manganese, and I found that it's actually beneficial. I feel much more alert and just like overall, and I feel like I have much more energy, and I'm able to have a sort of strength endurance to my lifestyle that I didn't have before. So if there was something that I would impart with y'all, is to look into that for yourself. I know that most homes typically have something similar to a water filter or filtration system, and all you have to do is just pop open the hood, and there's a little computer or CNC system that is tied to the management of the system itself, so you can actually like play around with some of these settings. Just be careful to go along and do it in a way that you're not infringing on the natural operation of the titration or filtration system itself, right? So most plastics or most substance materials have a natural range to where like adding too much of, if you want to put it, non-pollutants or non-oxygen or non-hydrogen molecules is just like detrimental to it. In other words, like you'll have to replace your filter in like no time. So that's kind of something I look into, but it makes your skin glow and you look so beautiful for it.